It happened late one afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to inquire about the woman. It was reported, "This is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." So David sent messengers to get her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now, she was purifying herself after her period. Then she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David, "I am pregnant." Yes, I know. That is a story that we have dealt with on this podcast before. In fact, it is a story that I have told not only from Bathsheba's point of view, but also from that of her husband and her grandfather. It is a story that just keeps on giving. But what would you say to an entirely different perspective on that tale? How would it be different if it happened today? If it was set maybe in New York City and among recent events that we have all lived through? That might help us to see that narrative through new eyes. Wouldn't that be something? Fortunately, I don't need to retell that story because someone else has already done it. Earlier this year, the award-winning novelist Jeanne Blasberg published her book, Daughter of a Promise, about the relationship between a Cuban-American intern named Betsabe, which is, I learned, the Spanish form of that other name, and a titan of Wall Street named Mr. David. I read it recently and truly enjoyed it. So I have invited Ms. Blasberg to come on the podcast to discuss it. I thought my listeners would really enjoy hearing about the work that she does because, well, this is Retelling the Bible. Extra episode, Daughter of a Promise, with Jeanne Blasberg. So I am here and I am in conversation, and I'm very happy to be in conversation with Jeanne Blasberg. I just finished maybe a week or so ago reading her extraordinary book. I better remember the title of the book. It's Daughter of Promise, correct?
Yes.
Yes, Daughter of Promise. And I love it because Jeanne has taken a different approach basically to what I do. I love to retell Bible stories, and I generally do it as a kind of a historical novel. I want to tell the story and bring out the historical details in the original setting, and by discovering it as a narrative in that setting, it brings out so many other aspects and allows us to see the story in new ways and find new things in it. Now, what you have done, Jeanne, is that you have taken the amazing story, one that I've come back to many times, of Bathsheba and Uriah and David and all of those incredible characters, and you have put it in very much a modern setting, modern day New York, and even more important, in very recent history. And Before I get too deep into the story and the things that fascinates me about it, maybe Jeanne, you could tell me a little bit about yourself and what made you decide to write, in particular, this kind of book.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. I'm excited to be here to talk with you as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to someone who knows this story so well. I've been doing podcasts, but a lot of folks are interested in both the writing journey, but also the like my life of moving from Boston to becoming a farmer. And so I am so excited to actually get into the gritty part of the story with another person who enjoys Bible stories. It's only been
Okay.
maybe 25% of my conversations have really gone deep into the subject matter. My background is that I converted to Judaism about 20 years ago, and in so doing, embarked on this amazing educational journey that I never wanted to end. And so I have been going to a Torah study class monthly for the last 20 years at my temple, led by Rabbi Zecher, and our emphasis is Midrash. So her mandate is for us to look at these stories and ask the question or ask the questions that are not answered and to do some writing and try to answer the questions ourselves, much as the rabbinic tradition of midrash as a verb, and then midrash is a canon of writing that kind of explains a lot of questions. But it's not, she makes the point, it's not exclusive to the rabbis. We can all try to address the questions we have. So I've always enjoyed writing. I've always been a writer, and at some point about similar time frame, about 20 years ago, I set off on writing my first novel called Eden, which, given its title, you can guess it's an exploration of the idea of paradise. And I used a lot of biblical imagery and symbols, and the women in my novel throughout the generations take on the names of the female matriarchs. And in a lot of ways, I hoped with my first two novels to launch with this symbolism and with references to certain stories in Genesis or the book of Samuel, the idea that the human struggle continues, that in my contemporary settings, we are still very much the flawed humans that are the characters in these stories, and that even though the world and our technology and a lot of things are so much different, basic human relationships and emotions, disappointments, love, desire, you name it, they really haven't changed that much, and we have so much to learn. So with my third novel, Daughter of a Promise, I really decided to mirror the plot much more closely than I ever did in the past. In the past, I was more using, references, allusions, and symbols in my own story. But here, I'm trying to really mirror the plot. And in studying David and Bathsheba the first time, and we can, this might be a follow-up question you want to ask, but I just saw that as a contemporary story as I was reading it and studying it in like 2012, 2013. So it was just begging to come alive again. And I love the idea that there are limited plots in this world, and so much of our DNA around literature comes from these earliest writings, these earliest stories and books. They're almost in our DNA. So I find them particularly, or I find the Torah particularly ripe for retellings, because even if you don't know the Bible well, there's something familiar and you kind of know where the story is supposed to go. And so it's great for an author to then put it in a different framework and explore a new way of telling it that's more appropriate for our modern times.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and of course, I'm totally there with you because that's exactly why I do what I do. I love to just dive into the narrative, and I mean, I don't have the same kind of literary skills as obviously you do, that I can totally change the setting. I've tried some of that sometimes, but I try and stay in the original setting. But yeah, I mean, very clearly, I started reading this book, and it was very quickly, oh, what if, what is the equivalent of a David, this all-powerful king in our modern world? And of course, you go straight to Wall Street and to um, the mergers and
Yeah.
acquisitions, the Wolf of
He's a
Wall Street kind of
he's a
character.
titan of capitalism, right?
Absolutely. And the and in many ways, because of course the story of Bathsheba is such a tragedy for this woman, and we focus on what happens to her. Um, but what I did when I retold her story from her point of view, I recognized, and I'm really glad that in your book you also recognize her as a heroine. She's not merely a victim. She is victimized. I think she's very clearly victimized in the Bible story. I think she's also uh, a victim in your story, though you keep that a little bit more subtle. You sort of
Well, she
um,
doesn't want to be considered a victim. I mean,
no,
I think we both have to reconcile the fact that David and Bathsheba remained together even after the death of their first child, and they stay together and have more children. And I mean, I guess in biblical times, she had really no choice but to stay.
right,
Um, but they do continue a long marriage where their next child is the king, and she promotes him to be the king. And so, um, in my novel, where it's a contemporary setting, but I know they will end up together, there's this woman's refusal to be a victim and to reframe everything so that she doesn't think of her child's death as punishment or the consequence. She refuses to take on that mantle of the victim. Um, but yeah, definitely the power imbalance has it difficult to imagine it's anything but.
yeah, yeah, and I really appreciated that you made her a strong character. You made her not the victim, ultimately by her own choice, which I think is fantastic. And I mean, from my point of view and the way I told her story, yeah, she ultimately saves the nation when David eventually fails. So she is absolutely a hero. Um, and the other thing, the fact that we often forget that Bathsheba is the mother of Solomon. And I got to say, by reading your story, I believe I gained some new understanding of the role of Bathsheba in in Solomon and who he becomes. In particular, I just wanted one quote I had when she's writing to her son that stuck out to me in particular. It's on page 272. But she writes to her son, "Dear son, I want you to know," this is as she's talking about going to this protest, "I want you to know that even though it was my first protest and I probably shouldn't have attended, the passion of the crowd infused me with a desire to speak up for the voiceless. I hope you'll feel the same way someday. Look out for the unfortunate, judge righteously, be an advocate for the poor." And that is so deeply biblical. And I know you obviously realize that this is what a king is supposed to be the one who stands up for, protects, and saves the people who have no ability to save themselves. The royal psalms are all about that. And here,
Well, can I
Solomon
interrupt
didn't learn that from David, right?
No, so
No
I
way
want
did.
to interrupt. I
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
interrupt and
Sorry.
jump in. So for your listeners, this is a contemporary novel set between June 2019 and June 2020. But the way I tell it, Bathsheba's now older, um,
Right.
in an unknown future, but not that much far into the future. She's now pregnant with Saul, and she is writing a letter to him. So this entire book is constructed as a wisdom letter to Saul. And we know from the Bible that King Solomon holds the mantle of wisdom. And he is known for being wise. David was known for being the great warrior. The implication, and I think it might even be more than an implication, though, is that Solomon asked God for certain gifts, and God granted him wisdom in addition to all the things he might need to be a good king. But my presumption in writing this is that a good deal of his wisdom came from his mother, in form of a letter, and because Bathsheba had lived through such tragedy and through such, challenges. She had so much wisdom to impart. And that quote that you just read, I think that's actually pulled right out of Proverbs in terms of what a just person should do. So to the extent Solomon then goes on to write Proverbs, his mother, his my Bethsabe's voice is echoed in that. And I was studying Solomon and wisdom literature just 2 years ago as I was putting finishing touches on this novel. And I hadn't yet come up with the device of telling it as a letter to her unborn child. But it seemed to be so perfect, because a question an author always has to ask is, why is this story important? Why is it necessary for my narrator to be telling it at this point in time? What's the reason for telling it? And yes, she had this desire to get her own version out in the world. Yes, it was a story that was kind of burning inside her, but also she was nervous to have another child, and she felt it comforting and relaxing to feel that she was able to get things down about David, who Solomon would never know as a young, she'd only know him as an older man. Anyway, the idea to write it as a letter to Saul really was one of the last things that came about, and it was during my study of wisdom literature and Proverbs. And so much of what we attribute to Solomon as wisdom, I tried to then kind of crib some of those actual concepts and put them in the voice of his mother, saying, you shouldn't drink too much, you shouldn't treat women this way, you should look out for the poor, you should be an advocate for the voiceless and the unfortunate. And so when you say it sounds biblical, it really, it's because it is.
Yes, I realize it is. Yes, and I know you know that, but yeah. And I appreciate, and just being able to see, not only is this woman, she's a strong woman, she saves the nation, but her role in forming this next king and what he's supposed to be, it brought me a perspective that I hadn't necessarily considered before. So I really appreciated being able to see some of these things
And
in
then
a new
in a more
light.
secular light, what woman doesn't want to pass down wisdom to a son? I think women pass down a lot of wisdom to daughters, and sons might look to fathers for a certain type of wisdom, but there really is an emotional intelligence that comes from the mother, and that's what my character was trying to impart on this son. And it's a lot of what she learned in her year of trying to figure out, is this love? What is love? What is wealth, and what does it mean to me? What does this man's power mean to me? How would it shape me, and what would I do with it if I had it? I mean, there's a lot of growing up she does, and a lot of questions, and she learns so much, and she really wants to impart what she's learned, and not even though it was a painful year, for it to not be in vain, and for her to be able to pass it on.
Yeah, and what a year, of course, you said it, because what you say is it starts, 2018 to 20, what's this?
I jumped to the conclusion that the beginning months of COVID intersect with my timeline, and that is actually something that helped my plot. When you have a young woman and a much older man develop a relationship that's somewhat meaningful, it happened behind closed doors during isolation, and their ability to be secret and not scrutinized was in part due to this thing I realized while I was writing it, that people were all closed up in their houses with one another, and there was a great privacy was possible, a lot of privacy. So they end up my David and Betsabe end up sequestering together, and their relationship morphs from one that was sort of like physical chemistry to one that's way more family like and emotional and psychological. And yeah, so it was just like everything under COVID. It was a bit of an incubator for feelings and emotions and connections,
Yeah.
either for better or for worse,
Yeah.
depending on who
Yeah.
you were in your pod with.
Yes. Yeah, and that's an interesting plot device. And of course, yeah, to pull it from recent history is really helpful, really current as you read it. I sort of, because I always took it that David raped Bathsheba. There was total, and there's total power differential in your story. Um, I kind of assumed that they came to at least respect, honor one another through that terrible experience of losing a child together. And, that created a connection that led them. But this was a really interesting way to
Well,
make that connection. Yeah.
the word rape is never used. I mean, he summons her.
Yeah.
She's married to one of his generals, and he summons her, and she's been bathing on the roof um, to cleanse herself
She's
after her
she
period.
doesn't bathe on the roof though. That's a misunderstanding.
Okay, where
He's the
does she
one on the
bathe?
roof.
He's
Yes.
on the roof.
She's in a private space inside her house and he's spying on her. But yeah, but anyways, I don't want to get into the whole debate. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of David in the Bible, but
The thing
yeah,
that's so great, Scott, and it's just coming up like with our conversation here, is that there has been a debate. And
yeah,
so the fact that there's always been this debate made the story feel so timely to me. It was the peak of the Me Too movement, and men
yeah.
were being removed from positions and women were feeling empowered to speak out. And all of a sudden I read this story and I was like, David is gonna he needs to be canceled, he but on the other hand, I didn't want it to be that black and white. There's some nuance around a relationship that only the two people in the relationship can ever understand.
They get to
And
define it. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I thought, what if there's a little gray area? What if this woman has feelings, reciprocal feelings in some way? You know, it wasn't like the most popular thing of her generation to want to do, and she has plenty of friends who are defining what's going on for her. But she's got a constant internal battle going on what this actually is. And I find exploring kind of the gray area when consent is either a yes or no question in 2024. Is it really, though? Because a young woman growing up and becoming an adult is faced with more occasions than you can count on where things are murky and not totally clear. And that's kind of the phenomenon I wanted to play with.
Yeah.
I also wanted, just like you, I wanted to give her a voice and tell the story from her point of view.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, consent is something that you don't want to take that away from anyone. It is their choice to give ultimately. Yeah. And yeah, no, I appreciate that. I wanted to, if I could, just turn to a few of the other characters who really jumped out at me. With someone who spent so much time in the story, many of them jumped out as soon as I read their name. So Abigail, right away I jumped on. Of course, I've done an episode on Abigail, and she's this really interesting background character. She's already gone in your book, but she is so present and powerful, even though she's dead. She's the one, as I read, there's a profile in Town and Country that describes her as this natural peacekeeper, the perfect complement to David's warrior inclinations. Once again, ripped directly from the Bible, almost exactly. But I also get the impression I'm not sure the biblical Abigail ever loved David. I think she was she was she was just practical. She was she did what she needed to do to
Get away
survive
from
and to
her
save her
drunken
family.
husband. Yeah.
Yeah, but well, I think she had no choice. She was trying to save the household. But anyways, um, but I think in your book she's kind of idealized because she's no longer present. She is
Yeah.
this ideal saintly woman. She has no flaws because she's dead, right?
It's
And
somewhat
that makes her this
reminiscent.
powerful
Yeah.
presence. But
In
yeah,
literary terms, and you can tell as a writer, I really love being in conversation with other works. I think a lot of Rebecca, and her absence in the book, Rebecca, and the new young wife trying to live up, like trying to learn and live up to what it means to be married to this powerful man just by like looking around the house at the belongings, imagining what would have hung in the closet, at the artwork, and trying to learn from somebody else's, like almost being an anthropologist of the grace and kind of the elegance that this former wife or this late wife must have known. And yes, I do idealize her. I make her the reason. Like in my novel, she's died of cancer maybe a year earlier, and that loss is something that's responsible for David's maybe mellowing a little or becoming a little bit more understanding, whereas his warrior inclination was always there. The idea that he should do right by Bathsheba or Betsabe was something that the voice of Abigail kind of spoke to him. And yeah, I use that. Like there's a lot I had to do in this novel to make David, to make him a sympathetic character or to make him appealing. One is that he really loves women. We know that, but he takes this advice or what he would think Abigail would have wanted him to do and takes it to heart. He also just is caring and tender in a way. I have him, they adopt a puppy during COVID and he's just very sweet with the animal and becomes sweet in a lot of ways. I could not repel my reader to think he's kind of a predator or a like people in my writing fellowships that we have to get rid of the ick factor. So I really thought about, and no character is a true like perfect person and no one's a true villain. Everybody's complicated and has elements of both. But as David becomes older and is taken out of is kind of a backseat general. He's not really the fighter anymore. And in my book, it's representative that he's kind of on the decline of his career. He hasn't had a big deal in the newspaper in quite some years. He has a little neuroses about what he's going to do next. He also, there's a softness that comes out in him that was really necessary so that it would be plausible that somebody would want to stay with him.
mm-hmm.
And Abigail helps me to do that.
Yeah,
Abigail's absence and her voice.
yeah. I got to say, having finished reading the book, I'm still not sure I like David. Now that might just be because I really don't like the biblical David, and he's a little reminds me. But I mean,
That's
I
okay.
recognize we're supposed to be torn about him anyway. So yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And some of my readers don't like Betsabe, but they love the
Okay.
book. But you know what? I don't think that it's an author's job to write likable characters all the time because, well, at least I don't want to just be writing likable
No,
characters.
no. Everybody's like you say, everybody's flawed, and we don't want to hide. And obviously, Betsabe is flawed as well, and she's got her shortcomings, but she's also got that deep strength. I want to talk a little bit for a moment about Grant, because as soon as I figured out who Grant was, I started worrying about the poor guy. Um, and you follow his story beat by beat. I won't say who he was, but people will figure that out pretty quickly, I think. Follow his story beat by beat. I wondered if you were going to kill him, because you could have killed him very easily
I
in
killed
Hong
his
Kong.
career. I
You
killed
killed
his
his
career.
career. Yeah, okay. But I mean, people were dying in Hong Kong in those days of the pandemic, so you could have done it. But anyways, I guess I'm glad you didn't. But
I think enough people shed tears over the baby dying. I did not need to kill
yeah,
Grant
yeah,
too.
no, yeah,
I
I
mean,
don't.
people who don't know the biblical story and don't realize that that's coming, I was getting a lot of messages from early readers like, you should have warned me about chapter 34.
Oh yeah.
But
Well, I of
like,
course knew that was coming. Yes, and especially once once the baby was born premature. Yeah, this one is pretty much settled. I figured out. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, if you're not really familiar with the story, you're going to miss that beat. The other character, I got to say, I'm still kind of fascinated with, and I know she's a minor character, but is Tamara because her name also jumped out at me because
of
that's got
Tamar.
to, yeah, that's got
Mhm.
to, David's only daughter, at least who's mentioned in the Bible, and I wonder what's going to happen to her because
She's the protagonist of my next work in process.
she is okay.
I
I was
feel like
wondering
she
if that's
needs
what
her
was
own
happening. Yeah.
story, although I don't know how comfortable I feel writing that sexual assault. I almost feel like I want to write her healing journey, and I have her like fleeing her family and fleeing New York, and the whole Absalom and Amon thing kind of
Oh,
happens, and
wow.
she reads it about it in the news. But I don't know. I've got this maybe 100,000 word rambling thing, but I feel like I am not. I had to get a sensitivity reader, a cultural sensitivity editor to help me with my character Betsabe because she's Cuban American. And that's
Mm.
one thing that I knew I could get professional help with. But I don't feel like I'm the author to write about the trauma after like a terrible case of what is undoubtedly a rape and an incest
It did
situation
sense.
in,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
horrible.
And so
Yes.
I want to write about her, but I want to write her about her in a way that I think I can do it responsibly, and I'm really struggling with that.
Yeah.
I love her as a character, as this young woman, the only daughter of a powerful man. There's just so much that gets screwed up in your mind and wrapped into your relationship, and I'm really intrigued. So it's going to be hard, but I think it's going to be worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the kind of story. I mean, I feel even, less able to write as a man, obviously. Though, I mean, unfortunately, if you're telling Bible stories of rape and recovery from rape are just they're a dime a dozen, it seems, in the Bible, unfortunately. And I've dealt with many of them, but yeah, it's a horrible story. But I have not, no, I've told the first Tamar story, but not the second one. I'd like to, but like you say, it's one of those things. You wonder how on earth can you tell that? Yeah,
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 it's for everyone who's a survivor, you feel like you owe this. I don't know. It just feels like something that's hard to write about if it wasn't your experience. And so, yeah, I'm struggling with how I tell her story and where I pick it up and how I address that assault. So, I'm enjoying writing about Tamar. I'm fascinated with her story. I think it's really interesting that in the book of Samuel, towards the end of David's kingship and his reign and his kind of coming down the mountain, there are two stories of him acting horribly. I just find it so interesting that they were included in this canon, um, and yeah, and I think these women are incredible. If they're historical figures and true people, they're incredible. So, and it's also really easy to put them in contemporary settings because so much of that, like Electra complex or like the psychological thing between a mother, I mean, a son, son, a daughter and a father, or like a powerful man and a younger lover. It's just like, it's kind of cliche, but it's relatable and it's easy because we're, like I said, so much of what I find is timeless is this relationship and this emotional connection and psychological connection, which I don't think has changed in 2000 years.
Hmm. Now you're so yeah. Now I'm very interested in. I was wondering whether you were going to go into Tamar's story. You set her up as a character pretty powerfully with only like little minor bits where she steps in, but you enough to make us intrigued. So I'm very interested to hear you are going to tell her story. Now you're
And
going to make me.
my Betsabe really wanted a friendship with her, but was
Yeah,
feeling,
yeah,
yeah. So
and she's
that's,
definitely going to need a friend, isn't she? We
yeah,
all know
and
that.
that sets us up for maybe the
Yeah.
next book.
Yeah. Now I'm going to ask you. So, is there going to be an Abishag as well? And what happens
No.
with Betsy and Abishag? But okay, that's you're not going to go there. Okay.
I mean, I love writing these books that allude to real stories, but I also feel like I don't I'm doing it a little bit more like the story wants to be told in my point of view. I'm not like searching for
No.
all
Yeah.
of the potential threads. I think Betsabe's had her one book, and
Yeah.
um, for people who pick up Daughter of a Promise, my debut novel, Eden, is about this home on the Rhode Island shore that was the devotion of four generations of matriarchs. It was their sacred place. And anyway, it shows up in this book. So I have this tendency to create a huge imaginary world and go back to settings from prior books and use minor characters in previous novels as major characters. In my second novel, The Nine, which is kind of launched from the story of Hannah and Samuel, um, Dunning Academy is this institution where my Hannah mother figure sends her son off once he's weaned, although he's 14. He's a
Hmm.
little old. But anyway, she sends him off to this very venerable institution. It's a boarding school. It's called Dunning Academy. And his roommate, his freshman year roommate, Ethan Pierce, is Betsabe's best friend in the Wall Street training program. And
Okay. Yeah.
also Sam and Natalie from Dunning Academy make an appearance at brunch. And so for people who enjoy my writing, they can look for Easter eggs and have fun connections. It's not necessary, obviously, but it's something that I do. And so the idea of then giving Tamara her own novel just feels like something I'm probably going to do once I can figure out how to do it well.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I look forward to it. Yes, because that's an interesting one, and I'm sure that you can. I mean, it'll take some figuring out, but you can tell it in a sensitive and powerful way because you've certainly told this story in a very sensitive and powerful way. I really appreciated having the chance to discuss it and to read it and discuss it with you. And I don't know, is there anything else we need to say? That's
Well, what I just appreciate that you invited me on your podcast, somebody as learned and somebody who has gone as deep into these stories as you have, to have enjoyed my book and wanted to discuss it. This is probably the best thing an author can do, is have like a meaningful conversation with somebody that truly understands the story behind the story. And I would have to say less than 5% of my readers have any footing in the biblical story, even though right on the cover, the blurb
mhm.
at the top says it's the retelling of a biblical love story. Most people think I just invented this story, and they're like, I'm so mad that the baby died, and I'm so mad that she stayed with David. Or they'll say something like that, and I'm like, well, that was my challenge. Like, they had to stay together. I had to figure out what was it between these people. Anyway, to have the opportunity to talk to you, Scott, and to um, find readers that my work resonates with, this is why I do this. It's the greatest joy.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you how um, much I appreciate it. And if any of your readers love the story of David and Bathsheba and have a reaction towards my book, I am always eager to have a conversation. People can reach me on my website, on the contact page. I get those emails and I reply right away, and I'm eager to hear what folks think.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yes, and I would, if you're looking for a new way to connect narratively with the biblical story, yeah, I would definitely recommend Daughter of a Promise. I also wanted to say, I have told at this point, 4 episodes, different angles on the story of Bathsheba in the Bible. From Bathsheba's point of view, from Uriah's, from grandfather Ahithophel. I just put out sort of Absalom's story, which is somewhat connected. And the week after I'm thinking I'm going to publish this, I'm actually going to tell Nathan's point of view on the story, which is very, very close to what your character in your character, Nathan, in the book. Very, very close. I wrote it before I read your book, but it's...
The Secret Chord by Geraldine Brooks is set in the biblical setting, but so much of it is about the relationship between David and Nathan, and when David will listen to Nathan and when he's just like, shut up.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to read I've listened or read the essays you've written on everything you mentioned just now, with the exception of Absalom. Given what I just said about my Tamara story, I really need to go and read that, and I'm excited to hear your take from Nathan's point of view as well.
Yeah. So, but let me say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Thank you for sharing your book with the world, and I would love to see more of the people who are interested in the Bible reading this kind of literature. And maybe some of the people who like your book might enjoy my podcast as well. So come and check out Retelling the Bible too. So, yeah. But thank
Wonderful.
you. This
thanks,
is
Scott. Thank
interesting
you so
experience.
much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. I
Okay.
can't wait to continue to follow you as well.
Okay.
All
well,
right.
have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
That is it for this special extra episode of Retelling the Bible. Please subscribe so you can get the next regular episode. And yes, it will be Nathan's story next week. And please rate and review wherever you download your podcasts. The theme music for the podcast is Da by Kevin MacLeod. The music is from the Creative Commons and is available on incompetech.com. You can contact me on twitter.com @retellingbible and on the Facebook page Retelling the Bible. Show notes for this episode, including more information and links for Jeanne Blasberg, have been posted at retellingthebible.wordpress.com. This is Retelling the Bible, and your special guest storyteller today has been Jeanne Blasberg.